Welcome to No Sleep Historian, where the past never rests quietly, and what we remember is only what we're allowed to. Tonight, we open the doors to a history most were never meant to see. They called themselves monks, but their worship had no saints-only shadows. Behind the stone walls of country estates and deep beneath the English countryside, some of the most powerful men in the 18th century gathered in secret. They drank, they blasphemed, they performed rituals few dared to speak of. Their name, the Hellfire Club. Official history brushes them off as eccentric aristocrats playing dress-up. But what if that's exactly what they wanted you to believe? This is the story of the real Hellfire Clubs, their power, their secrets, and the darkness they left behind. Part 1. A Gentleman's Society of Vice. Picture Georgian England in the 1730s. Powdered wigs, elaborate court dress, and the facade of Christian piety mask a world of debauchery that would make modern scandal sheets blush. Beneath the veneer of respectability, a secret society was forming that would become synonymous with blasphemy, political intrigue, and occult ritual. This was the birth of the Hellfire Club, though its origins stretch back even further into the shadows of history. The first whispers of what would become the Hellfire Club emerged in London around 1719, when Philip Wharton, the first Duke of Wharton, established the original society. Wharton was a notorious rake, a man whose appetite for scandal matched his political ambitions. His club met at the Greyhound Tavern in Cheapside, where members would gather to mock religion, engage in drunken revelry, and conduct what contemporary accounts describe as hellish rituals. The club's initial motto was simple yet telling: "Do what thou wilt," a phrase that would echo through centuries of occult tradition. But Wharton's club was merely the prologue to a much darker story. The true architect of the Hellfire Club's legendary status was Sir Francis Dashwood, a man whose name would become forever linked with the most notorious secret society in British history. Born in 1708 to a wealthy family, Dashwood inherited vast estates and a fortune that would allow him to pursue his darkest fantasies without consequence. Dashwood's transformation from typical English aristocrat to the founder of England's most scandalous secret society began during his grand tour of Europe in the 1730s. In Italy, he encountered the remnants of ancient mystery religions, explored the catacombs of Rome, and allegedly participated in secret rites that opened his eyes to practices far removed from Anglican Christianity. Some accounts suggest he was initiated into Italian mystery cults, while others claim he discovered forbidden texts that revealed the true nature of divine worship. Upon his return to England, Dashwood began assembling like-minded individuals who shared his appetite for transgression. By 1746, he had established what would become known as the Monks of Medmenham, though they would later be immortalized as the Hellfire Club. The society's membership was deliberately exclusive, drawn from the highest ranks of British society. These weren't common criminals or street thugs, but members of Parliament, lords, poets, and even rumored connections to royalty. The choice of Medmenham Abbey as their meeting place was no accident. This former Cistercian monastery, founded in 1201, had fallen into ruin after Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries. Dashwood purchased the crumbling abbey in 1751 and began its transformation into something far removed from its original sacred purpose. The renovation was extensive and deliberate, turning the holy ground into a temple of hedonism. The public front of Dashwood's activities was carefully cultivated. To the outside world, he appeared to be a gentleman antiquarian, interested in architecture and historical preservation. The abbey's restoration was presented as a noble effort to preserve England's medieval heritage. Dashwood even served as Chancellor of the Exchequer, maintaining his respectable facade while secretly orchestrating some of the most scandalous gatherings in British history. But behind the restored medieval walls, something far darker was taking shape. The abbey's layout was specifically designed to accommodate the club's activities. The chapel was converted into a meeting hall where blasphemous rites could be conducted. The monks' cells were transformed into private chambers for intimate encounters. Gardens were landscaped to include hidden grottos and secret passages that allowed members to move unseen. Contemporary accounts, though often suppressed or destroyed, paint a picture of gatherings that combined religious mockery with sexual excess. The monks of Medmenham would arrive in hooded robes, their faces concealed, their identities known only to each other. They conducted mock masses where sacred Christian rituals were inverted and perverted. Wine flowed freely, often mixed with substances that heightened the participants' experiences. The worship of Bacchus and Venus wasn't merely metaphorical. Archaeological evidence suggests that the abbey contained shrines to Roman gods, complete with statues and altars where offerings were made. These weren't tourist curiosities, but active centers of worship, where members engaged in rituals that combined elements of ancient paganism with contemporary libertinism. Reports from the period describe orgies that lasted for days, with participants engaging in acts that scandalized even the relatively permissive Georgian society. Women were brought to the abbey under various pretenses, some willing participants, others allegedly coerced. The line between consensual debauchery and outright abuse was often blurred, with the club's wealth and influence protecting members from consequences. The secrecy surrounding these gatherings was paramount. Members swore oaths of silence, and breaking these vows was said to result in severe punishment. Some accounts suggest that those who threatened to expose the club's activities faced financial ruin, social ostracism, or worse. The fear of exposure kept most members silent, but occasional leaks provided tantalizing glimpses into the abbey's dark activities. Local villagers spoke in hushed tones about strange lights emanating from the abbey at night, about chanting that could be heard across the countryside, and about screams that echoed through the medieval walls. Servants who worked at the abbey were carefully selected for their discretion, and many signed agreements that bound them to secrecy even after their employment ended. The transformation of Medmenham Abbey represented more than just architectural renovation. It was a deliberate act of spiritual vandalism, taking a place once dedicated to Christian worship and converting it into a temple of excess. The symbolism was intentional and powerful, representing the club's rejection of conventional morality and their embrace of a different kind of spiritual practice. As word of the club's activities began to spread through London's social circles, the Hellfire Club's reputation grew. They were simultaneously feared and envied, condemned and secretly admired. The club represented everything that polite society claimed to reject, while secretly craving. The establishment of the Hellfire Club marked the beginning of one of history's most notorious secret societies, touching the highest levels of British government and society. The Abbey's transformation was complete, but the club's true influence was only beginning to be felt. Part 2: The Lords of Blasphemy. The membership roll of the Hellfire Club reads like a who's who of 18th century British society. but the very individuals who shaped politics, literature, and culture in Georgian England. Their participation in the club's activities reveals the deep hypocrisy that ran through the heart of the British establishment. At the center of this web of power and corruption stood Sir Francis Dashwood himself, but he was far from alone. The club's membership included John Wilkes, one of the most prominent political figures of his era and a champion of press freedom, who would later become Lord Mayor of London. Wilkes brought to the club not just his political connections, but his sharp wit and revolutionary spirit. His presence demonstrates how the club attracted individuals who challenged authority in public while indulging in far more transgressive behavior in private. The Earl of Sandwich, John Montague, was another prominent member whose participation in the club's activities would later contribute to one of the greatest. Sandwich held multiple government positions, including First Lord of the Admiralty, making his involvement in the club's blasphemous rites all the more shocking. His nickname within the club was Jemmy Twitcher, a reference to his nervous mannerisms, and, some suggest, his particular enthusiasms during the club's more intimate gatherings. Lord Byron's father, Captain John Byron. If true, it would explain the younger Byron's own fascination with scandal and transgression, the poetic tradition of romantic rebellion that would later define the Romantic movement. May have had its roots in the libertine philosophy practiced at Medmenham Abbey. Perhaps most intriguingly, the club's membership may have included individuals connected to the royal family itself. While no direct evidence proves royal participation, several courtiers and royal favorites were known members. The Duke of Queensberry, known as Old Q, was a regular participant whose legendary debauchery was whispered about in London's drawing rooms. His connections to the court meant that rumors of the club's activities may have reached the highest levels of British society. The question of Benjamin Franklin's involvement remains one of the most fascinating aspects of the club's history. Serving as a colonial agent and developing relationships with prominent British politicians. During these visits, he spent time at Dashwood's estate and was known to attend gatherings at the Abbey. While the exact nature of his participation remains unclear, Franklin's presence at Medmenham is well documented. Franklin's own writings provide tantalizing hints about his experiences with the club that suggests participation in activities beyond mere social gatherings. Some historians suggest that Franklin's famous experiments with electricity were inspired by techniques he learned during occult rituals at the Abbey. The American Founding Fathers' connection to the Hellfire Club takes on additional significance when considered alongside his later involvement in Freemasonry and other secret societies. Franklin's ability to move between different worlds of secrecy and influence suggests that his time with the Hellfire Club may have been part of a larger pattern of involvement in underground networks that shaped both British and American politics. The club's use of pseudonyms and monastic titles served multiple purposes beyond simple concealment, creating an alternate identity that allowed them to shed their public personas and embrace their darker impulses. This practice of assuming false names had deep psychological and spiritual significance, representing a ritual death and rebirth that freed participants from the constraints of their ordinary lives. The club members engaged in a form of spiritual rebellion that went beyond simple atheism. They were actively mocking and inverting the religious traditions that formed the foundation of British society. This wasn't mere irreverence, but a deliberate act of spiritual warfare against the established order. Rituals and mutual blackmail. New members underwent initiation ceremonies that bound them to the group through shared transgression. By participating in activities that would ruin their reputations if exposed, members became complicit in maintaining the club's secrecy. This created a web of mutual dependence that kept the organization's secrets safe for decades. When leaks did occur, they were often incomplete or distorted, designed to tantalize rather than fully expose. But they rarely provided specific details that could be verified. This strategy of controlled disclosure allowed the club to maintain its mystique while deflecting serious investigation. The partial truths that emerged only added to the club's legendary status. These were individuals who controlled government policy, commanded military forces, and shaped public opinion. Their participation in activities that contradicted their public personas created opportunities for blackmail and manipulation that may have influenced major political decisions. The club's meetings weren't just social gatherings, but potentially crucial moments in British political history. The presence of poets and writers among the membership ensured that the club's influence extended beyond politics into culture and literature. These individuals helped shape the intellectual climate of the Enlightenment, and their participation in the club's activities may have influenced the development of Romantic and Gothic literature. The themes of rebellion, transgression, and spiritual darkness that would later define these movements may have had their origins in the candlelit chambers of Medmenham Abbey. The club's membership also included individuals from the emerging merchant class, suggesting that participation wasn't limited to traditional aristocracy. These nouveau rich members brought financial resources and commercial connections that expanded the club's influence into new areas of society. The mingling of old nobility with new money created opportunities for political and economic manipulation that the club's leaders were quick to exploit. As the club's influence grew, so did the risks associated with membership. The potential for exposure increased with each new member, each new gathering, each new transgression. The bonds of secrecy that had initially protected the club began to strain under the weight of its own success. The very factors that made the club powerful also made it vulnerable, setting the stage for the scandals and revelations that would eventually contribute to its downfall. The Lords of Blasphemy had created something unprecedented in British society, a secret organization that combined political power, sexual transgression, and spiritual rebellion into a single dangerous whole. Their legacy would extend far beyond the walls of Medmenham Abbey, influencing secret societies, political movements, and occult practices for centuries to come. Part 3. Medmenham Abbey, England's unholy sanctuary. The transformation of Medmenham Abbey from a sacred Christian monastery into England's most notorious temple of vice represents one of history's most audacious acts of spiritual vandalism. What Sir Francis Dashwood accomplished at this ancient site went far beyond simple renovation or restoration. He systematically perverted every aspect of the Abbey's original sacred purpose, creating a dark mirror of Christian worship that would serve as the perfect setting for the Hellfire Club's blasphemous activities. The Abbey's history stretches back to 1201, when it was founded by Cistercian monks as a place of prayer, contemplation, and devotion to God. For over 3 centuries, the white-traubed monks of Medmenham had maintained their sacred duties, their daily prayers echoing through the stone corridors that would later witness far different kinds of worship. The dissolution of the monasteries under Henry VIII in 1536 had left the abbey in ruins, its sacred purpose abandoned, and its buildings slowly crumbling into decay. When Dashwood acquired the property in 1751, he found a site that perfectly suited his dark ambitions. The abbey's remote location along the Thames provided the privacy necessary for clandestine activities, while its sacred history offered opportunities for the kind of spiritual inversion that lay at the heart of the Hellfire Club's philosophy. The fact that Christian monks had once walked these halls and prayed in these chambers made the site's transformation all the more symbolically powerful. The renovation process was extensive and deliberate, designed to preserve the abbey's medieval appearance while adapting it for purposes that would have horrified its original inhabitants. Dashwood employed skilled craftsmen who were sworn to secrecy, ensuring that the true nature of the building's new purpose remained hidden from public view. The work took several years to complete, with every detail carefully planned to serve the club's ritualistic needs. The abbey's chapel, once the spiritual heart of the monastic community, became the centerpiece of Dashwood's unholy sanctuary. The altar was preserved but repurposed, its Christian symbolism replaced with imagery that reflected the club's pagan and libertine philosophy. Stained glass windows depicting saints and biblical scenes were either replaced or covered with designs that celebrated more earthly pleasures. The pews where monks had once knelt in prayer were rearranged to accommodate the club's ceremonial gatherings. Most shocking of all was Dashwood's decision to inscribe new mottos throughout the abbey, replacing Christian phrases with words that captured the club's philosophy of total freedom from moral constraint. The most famous of these inscriptions was Fais ce que voudras, the French translation of Do What Thou Wilt, which was carved above the abbey's main entrance. This phrase, borrowed from Rabelais' fictional abbey of Thelem, became the club's unofficial motto and would later inspire Aleister Crowley's development of Thelemic philosophy. The inscription wasn't merely decorative, but served as a statement of purpose that welcomed visitors into a world where conventional morality held no sway. Other Latin phrases throughout the abbey reinforced this message, with traditional Christian virtues replaced by celebrations of pleasure, desire, and self-indulgence. These inscriptions transformed the abbey's architecture into a kind of stone scripture that preached a gospel of hedonism and transgression. The monks' cells, once simple chambers where religious brothers slept and meditated, were converted into private rooms that served very different purposes. Each cell was furnished with luxurious beds, mirrors, and artwork that depicted scenes of classical mythology and erotic imagery. These chambers became the sites of intimate encounters that formed part of the club's ritual activities, where members could retreat with companions for private ceremonies or personal indulgence. The abbey's gardens were redesigned to reflect its new purpose, with hidden grottos and secret passages that allowed members to move unseen throughout the grounds. Classical statues depicting Roman gods and goddesses were placed strategically throughout the landscape, creating outdoor shrines where rituals could be conducted under the open sky. The juxtaposition of Christian architecture with pagan imagery created a visual representation of the club's philosophy of spiritual rebellion. Contemporary accounts describe the club's gatherings as elaborate theatrical performances that combined elements of religious ritual with sexual excess. Members would arrive dressed in monastic robes, their faces hidden by hoods, their identities concealed behind the club's veil of secrecy. The irony of libertines dressed as monks, conducting blasphemous rites in a former monastery, wasn't lost on participants, who reveled in the symbolic power of their transgression. The rituals themselves were carefully choreographed affairs that inverted traditional Christian practices. Mock masses were conducted with wine that flowed freely, often mixed with substances that enhanced the participants' experiences. The Eucharist was replaced with ceremonies that celebrated earthly rather than spiritual communion. Prayers were replaced with invocations to pagan gods, particularly Bacchus and Venus, whose worship formed the core of the club's religious practice. The worship of Bacchus, the Roman god of wine and ecstasy, took on particular significance within the abbey's walls. Members would conduct elaborate ceremonies involving the consumption of wine, often from vessels that had been blessed in rituals that inverted Christian practices. These bacchanalian rites were designed to break down inhibitions and create a state of spiritual intoxication that allowed participants to transcend conventional moral boundaries. Venus, the goddess of love and sexuality, was honored through rituals that celebrated physical pleasure as a form of divine worship. These ceremonies often involved the participation of women who were brought to the abbey under various pretenses. Some willing participants in the club's activities, others allegedly coerced or deceived. The line between consensual worship and exploitation was often blurred, with the club's wealth and influence protecting members from the consequences of their actions. The most disturbing allegations surrounding the abbey's activities involve claims of human sacrifice, though the evidence for these accusations remains contentious. Some accounts suggest that the club's rituals occasionally involved the death of participants, either through accidents during extreme ceremonies or through deliberate acts of violence. These allegations may have been propaganda spread by the club's enemies, but they contributed to the abbey's reputation as a place where the most extreme forms of transgression were not only tolerated but celebrated. Whether or not human sacrifice actually occurred at Medmenn Abbey, the mere existence of such rumors reveals the depths of depravity that contemporaries associated with the club's activities. The abbey had become a place where anything was possible, where the normal rules of society held no sway, and where the darkest impulses of human nature could be explored without consequence. The abbey's transformation was complete by the mid-1750s, creating a unique environment where spiritual rebellion, political intrigue, and sexual transgression could flourish under the protection of secrecy and wealth. The building itself became a character in the club's story, its ancient walls witnesses to activities that would have shocked and horrified the monks who had originally called it home. Archaeological evidence from the abbey suggests that Dashwood's renovations were even more extensive than historical accounts indicate. Hidden chambers and secret passages were built into the structure, creating spaces where the club's most sensitive activities could be conducted away from even the servants' eyes. These hidden areas may have served as repositories for the club's records, ritual objects, and other evidence of their activities. The abbey's unholy sanctuary represented more than just a meeting place for libertines and political conspirators. It was a deliberate act of spiritual warfare against the Christian foundation of British society, a physical manifestation of the Enlightenment's challenge to traditional religious authority. The fact that this challenge was mounted not by atheists or philosophers, but by the very individuals who publicly supported the established church made it all the more subversive and dangerous. Part 4. The Whispers Beneath the Thames. while Medmenham Abbey served as the public face of the Hellfire Club's activities. The true heart of their most secretive and disturbing rituals lay hidden beneath the earth in a network of caves that stretched deep into the chalky hills of West Wickham. These subterranean chambers, known today as the Hellfire Caves, represented the club's most ambitious and mysterious project, an underground temple complex that would serve as the setting for their darkest ceremonies. The caves were not natural formations, but an elaborate construction project that began in the 1750s under Sir Francis Dashwood's direction. The official story presented to the public was that Dashwood was providing employment for local workers, while simultaneously creating useful chalk quarries. The chalk extracted from the excavation was used for road construction, giving the project a veneer of civic improvement that masked its true purpose. But the reality was far more sinister and complex. The excavation process took nearly a decade to complete, with work conducted in shifts that ensured secrecy. Local laborers were employed for the basic digging, but the more sensitive aspects of the construction were handled by skilled craftsmen who were sworn to secrecy. The caves were designed according to a specific plan that incorporated both practical and symbolic elements, creating an underground sanctuary that would serve the club's ritualistic needs while remaining hidden from public view. The cave system extends for nearly half a mile into the hillside, following a winding path that leads visitors deeper into the earth through a series of chambers and tunnels. The journey through the caves was deliberately designed to be disorienting and transformative, with each chamber representing a different stage in the initiation process that new members underwent. The darkness, the cool air, and the echoing sounds created an atmosphere that was both mystical and menacing. The entrance to the caves was carefully concealed, accessible only through a hidden doorway that was camouflaged to blend with the natural landscape. This secrecy was crucial to the club's operations, as it allowed members to enter and exit without being observed by local residents or government agents. The hidden nature of the entrance also added to the mystique of the caves, creating a sense of entering a forbidden realm that existed beyond the reach of conventional authority. The first chamber visitors encountered upon entering the caves was relatively simple, designed to serve as a gathering place where members could prepare for the rituals that would follow. This antechamber contained basic furnishings and served as a checkpoint where participants' identities could be verified and their commitment to secrecy confirmed. The chamber's walls were decorated with symbols that hinted at the deeper mysteries that awaited further into the cave system. As visitors progressed deeper into the caves, the chambers became increasingly elaborate and disturbing. The walls were carved with images that combined Christian iconography with pagan symbols, creating a visual narrative that told the story of spiritual rebellion and transformation. Demons danced alongside angels, serpents coiled around crosses, and ancient gods presided over scenes of debauchery and worship. These carvings were not mere decoration, but served as a kind of stone scripture that guided participants through the club's philosophy. The most shocking discoveries within the caves were the shrines dedicated to ancient gods and goddesses, particularly those associated with fertility, death, and the underworld. These shrines were not archaeological curiosities, but active centers of worship where offerings were made and rituals conducted. The presence of altars stained with what appeared to be blood, though the exact nature of these stains remains unknown, suggests that the club's activities included elements that went far beyond simple sexual transgression. Contemporary accounts from local residents describe strange phenomena associated with the caves during the period of the club's most active use. Lights were seen emanating from the hillside at night, despite the fact that the caves were supposedly empty. Sounds of chanting, screaming, and what some described as inhuman howling echoed across the countryside, particularly during the new moon when the club's most important rituals were conducted. These accounts, while possibly exaggerated, suggest that the caves were the site of activities that deeply disturbed those who witnessed them. The acoustic properties of the caves were particularly well suited to the club's ritualistic purposes. The stone chambers amplified and distorted sounds, creating an environment where whispers became roars and screams took on otherworldly qualities. This acoustic manipulation was likely intentional, designed to heighten the psychological impact of the rituals and create an atmosphere of supernatural dread that would bind participants to the club through shared terror and transgression. The deepest chamber in the cave system, known as the Inner Temple, was reserved for the club's most secretive and dangerous rituals. This chamber was larger than the others and contained the most elaborate decorations, including a massive altar that dominated the space. The altar was carved from a single piece of chalk and decorated with symbols that drew from multiple religious traditions, creating a syncretic worship space that could accommodate various forms of spiritual rebellion. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Inner Temple was the site of activities that involved fire, as evidenced by scorch marks on the walls and ceiling. These burns may have been the result of torches and candles used for illumination, but some investigators have suggested that they indicate the use of fire in ritualistic contexts. The possibility that the club conducted fire ceremonies in the underground chamber adds another layer of mystery to their activities. The presence of what appear to be restraint systems built into the walls of various chambers has raised disturbing questions about the nature of the club's rituals. These iron rings and chains may have been used for theatrical purposes, allowing participants to enact scenes of imprisonment and liberation as part of their ceremonies. However, the more sinister possibility that they were used for actual restraint during non-consensual activities cannot be entirely dismissed. Local folklore surrounding the caves includes numerous accounts of paranormal activity that allegedly continues to this day. Visitors have reported seeing figures in period dress moving through the tunnels, hearing voices speaking in languages that cannot be identified, and experiencing sudden temperature drops that seem to follow them through the cave system. While these accounts may be the result of suggestion and atmosphere, they demonstrate the lasting impact that the club's activities had on the local community's collective memory. The caves also served practical purposes beyond their ritualistic function. The complex tunnel system provided multiple escape routes that allowed members to flee if their activities were discovered by authorities. Secret passages connected the caves to other locations in the area, including Dashwood's mansion and possibly even Medmenham Abbey itself. This network of underground connections created a hidden infrastructure that supported the club's operations while maintaining their secrecy. The question of whether the club's activities in the caves constituted genuine Satanism or were simply elaborate theatrical performances remains contentious. The evidence suggests elements of both, with genuine occult practices mixed with satirical commentary on conventional religion. The presence of authentic ritual objects, alongside obviously theatrical props, indicates that the club's relationship with the supernatural was complex and multifaceted. The cave's design incorporated elements from various mystery traditions, including Egyptian, Greek, and Roman religious practices. This syncretism suggests that the club's leaders were well-versed in comparative religion and drew inspiration from multiple sources in creating their underground temple. The result was a unique religious environment that combined scholarly knowledge with practical application in ways that challenged conventional understanding of both religion and morality. The whispers beneath the Thames continue to echo through history, carrying stories of transgression, transformation, and terror that shaped one of England's most notorious secret societies. The caves remain a testament to the power of secrecy and the lengths to which individuals will go to create spaces where conventional rules do not apply. Their legacy continues to influence our understanding of the relationship between power, religion, and human nature. Part 5: Mockery, Magic, and Misrule. The Hellfire Club's activities represented far more than simple debauchery or political conspiracy. At their core, the club's rituals and philosophy embodied a complex fusion of Enlightenment skepticism, occult revival, and deliberate spiritual rebellion that challenged the very foundations of 18th century British society. This unique combination of mockery, magic, and misrule created something unprecedented in European history, a secret society that used transgression as both entertainment and genuine spiritual practice. The Enlightenment context of the club's activities cannot be understood without recognizing the broader intellectual revolution that was transforming European thought during the 18th century. The period's emphasis on reason, scientific inquiry, and skepticism toward traditional authority created an environment where established religious practices could be questioned and alternative forms of spiritual expression could be explored. The Hellfire Club emerged from this intellectual ferment, representing both the liberation and the dangers inherent in Enlightenment thinking. The club's approach to religion was simultaneously satirical and sincere, mocking conventional Christianity while genuinely embracing alternative spiritual practices. This duality created a unique form of religious expression that was both intellectually sophisticated and deliberately transgressive. Members could participate in blasphemous rituals while simultaneously engaging in serious philosophical discussions about the nature of divinity, morality, and human purpose. The influence of Rosicrucianism on the club's activities is evident in their emphasis on secret knowledge, symbolic ritual, and the pursuit of hidden truths. Rosicrucian philosophy, with its promise of spiritual transformation through esoteric practices, provided a framework for the club's activities that went beyond simple hedonism. The quest for forbidden knowledge that characterized Rosicrucian thinking found expression in the club's exploration of sexual, political, and spiritual transgression. Connections to Freemasonry, while not explicitly documented, are suggested by the club's use of symbolic ritual, hierarchical organization, and emphasis on secrecy. Many of the club's members were known Freemasons, and the organizational structure of the Hellfire Club bears similarities to Masonic lodges. The difference lay in the content of their activities, with the Hellfire Club taking the concept of secret brotherhood in directions that would have shocked even the most liberal Masonic lodges. The alchemical symbolism present throughout the club's rituals and meeting places reveals a serious engagement with Hermetic traditions that stretched back to medieval times. Alchemy, with its emphasis on transformation and the pursuit of hidden knowledge, provided a perfect metaphor for the club's activities. The transformation of base metals into gold paralleled the club's goal of transforming conventional morality into a higher form of spiritual freedom. The presence of alchemical symbols in the caves and abbey wasn't merely decorative, but served as a kind of visual instruction manual for the club's spiritual practices. The marriage of opposites, the dissolution of boundaries, and the pursuit of the philosopher's stone all found expression in the club's rituals. These symbols communicated complex philosophical ideas to initiated members, while remaining meaningless to outsiders. The question of whether the club's activities represented genuine occult practice or elaborate satire remains one of the most fascinating aspects of their history. Evidence suggests that the reality was more complex than either interpretation alone would suggest. The club's leaders were clearly engaged in serious study of occult traditions, but they approached these practices with a spirit of intellectual curiosity rather than religious devotion. The club's use of humor and irony in their rituals created a unique form of spiritual practice that was both reverent and irreverent. They could conduct serious ceremonies while simultaneously mocking the very traditions they were exploring. This approach reflected the Enlightenment's skeptical attitude toward all forms of authority, including occult traditions that claimed exclusive access to truth. The theatrical elements of the club's rituals were not merely window dressing, but essential components of their spiritual practice. The use of costumes, dramatic lighting, and elaborate staging created an environment where participants could transcend their ordinary identities and explore aspects of human nature that were normally suppressed. The theater of transgression became a vehicle for genuine spiritual transformation. The club's exploration of sexual magic, while shocking to contemporary sensibilities, represented a serious engagement with traditions that viewed sexuality as a pathway to spiritual enlightenment. Tantric practices, fertility rituals, and other forms of sacred sexuality had been part of human religious experience for millennia. The club's activities, while extreme by 18th century standards, placed them within a broader tradition of spiritual practice that used physical pleasure as a means of transcendence. The political dimensions of the club's activities cannot be separated from their spiritual and philosophical aspects. The rejection of conventional morality was inherently political, challenging the authority of church and state, while asserting the individual's right to self-determination. The club's motto, "Do what thou wilt," was not merely a license for self-indulgence, but a revolutionary statement about human freedom and responsibility. The club's influence on subsequent occult movements is evident in the work of later figures like Aleister Crowley, who adopted their motto and incorporated many of their practices into his own spiritual system. The connection between the Hellfire Club and modern occultism demonstrates the lasting impact of their experiments in spiritual rebellion and alternative religious practice. The literary and artistic legacy of the club's activities can be seen in the development of Gothic literature, Romantic poetry, and other cultural movements that celebrated transgression and explored the darker aspects of human nature. The club's members included writers and artists who brought their experiences into their creative work, influencing the development of entire literary genres. The psychological dimensions of the club's activities reveal a sophisticated understanding of human nature that anticipated many later developments in psychology and anthropology. The use of ritual, symbol, and transgression to explore the unconscious mind demonstrated insights that would not be formally recognized until the work of Freud and Jung centuries later. The club's approach to gender and sexuality, while limited by the constraints of their historical period, represented a radical departure from conventional 18th century attitudes. Their exploration of sexual freedom, while often exploitative, challenged traditional gender roles and opened discussions about human sexuality that would not be fully developed until the 20th century. The integration of intellectual discourse with physical practice created a unique form of philosophical exploration that engaged both mind and body in the pursuit of truth. The club's activities demonstrated that serious intellectual inquiry could be combined with physical experience in ways that enhanced both its holistic approach to knowledge and experience, represented a significant departure from the dualistic thinking that dominated European philosophy. The club's legacy in terms of secret society, organization, and practice influenced numerous subsequent groups. From 19th century occult orders to modern esoteric organizations, their model of combining intellectual inquiry, ritual practice, and political influence created a template that continues to be followed by secret societies today. The ultimate question of whether the Hellfire Club represented a genuine spiritual movement or an elaborate joke may be unanswerable because it assumes a distinction that the club itself rejected. Their activities demonstrated that mockery and reverence, intellectual inquiry and physical practice, political rebellion and spiritual transformation could all be aspects of the same underlying reality. In this sense, the club's greatest achievement may have been the demonstration that such distinctions are artificial and limiting. The whispers of mockery, magic, and misrule that echoed through the halls of Medmenham Abbey and the caves of West Wickham continue to resonate in contemporary discussions about religion, sexuality, and human freedom. The club's legacy reminds us that the boundaries between sacred and profane, serious and satirical, spiritual and physical are more fluid than conventional wisdom suggests. The club's sophisticated understanding of the power of ritual and symbol to transform consciousness anticipated many later developments in psychology, anthropology, and religious studies. Their recognition that transgression could serve as a pathway to enlightenment, while dangerous and often destructive, represented a genuine insight into the nature of human consciousness and spiritual development. The integration of Enlightenment rationalism with occult practice created a unique synthesis that influenced subsequent intellectual and spiritual movements. The club demonstrated that scientific skepticism and mystical experience were not necessarily incompatible, but could be combined in ways that enhanced both rational understanding and spiritual insight. The political implications of the club's activities extended far beyond their immediate historical context. Their assertion of individual freedom against institutional authority, while often selfish and destructive, contained seeds of ideas that would later inspire democratic movements and civil rights campaigns. The principle that individuals should be free to determine their own moral and spiritual paths, regardless of traditional authority, became a cornerstone of modern liberal thought. The club's exploration of alternative forms of community and social organization, while limited by the constraints of their historical period and social position, represented experiments in human social arrangements that anticipated later communal movements and alternative lifestyle communities. Their rejection of conventional family structures and social hierarchies, while often exploitative, opened discussions about human relationships that continue to influence contemporary social movements. The artistic and literary legacy of the club's activities can be traced through the development of Romantic literature, Gothic fiction, and other cultural movements that celebrated individual expression and explored the darker aspects of human nature. The club's influence on the development of these genres demonstrates the lasting impact of their experiments in transgression and spiritual rebellion. The club's approach to knowledge and learning, which combined intellectual study with experiential practice, represented a sophisticated understanding of human consciousness that anticipated later developments in educational theory and cognitive science. Their recognition that true understanding required both intellectual comprehension and personal experience remains relevant to contemporary discussions about learning and human development. The theological implications of the club's activities, while often dismissed as mere blasphemy, represented a serious engagement with fundamental questions about the nature of divinity, morality, and human purpose. Their exploration of alternative forms of spiritual practice, while extreme and often destructive, contributed to ongoing discussions about religious pluralism and the diversity of human spiritual experience. The club's legacy in terms of gender relations and sexual freedom, while limited by the constraints of their historical period, represented early experiments in challenging traditional sexual norms and exploring alternative forms of intimate relationships. Their activities, while often exploitative, opened discussions about human sexuality that would not be fully developed until the sexual revolution of the 20th century. The psychological insights embedded in the club's practices, particularly their understanding of the role of ritual and transgression in human consciousness, anticipated many later developments in depth psychology and therapeutic practice. Their recognition that conventional moral constraints could be both protective and limiting remains relevant to contemporary discussions about mental health and human development. The club's influence on subsequent secret societies and occult movements demonstrates the lasting impact of their organizational model and spiritual practices. Their combination of intellectual inquiry, ritual practice, and political influence created a template that continues to be followed by esoteric organizations today. The ultimate significance of the Hellfire Club's experiments in mockery, magic, and misrule may lie not in their specific activities, but in their demonstration that human consciousness and social organization are more flexible and diverse than conventional wisdom suggests. Their legacy reminds us that the boundaries between reason and intuition, individual and community, sacred and profane, are human constructions that can be transcended through careful study and bold experimentation. The whispers that began in the caves beneath West Wickham continue to echo through history, carrying messages about human freedom, spiritual exploration, and the complex relationship between power and transgression. Whether viewed as cautionary tale or inspiration, the Hellfire Club's legacy remains a powerful reminder of both the possibilities and the dangers inherent in the human quest for meaning and transcendence. Part 6. Scandal in the Shadows. The year was 1763, and London's political establishment trembled on the edge of collapse. What began as whispered rumors in coffeehouses had erupted into a full-blown scandal that threatened to topple the government itself. At the center of it all stood John Wilkes, a member of Parliament whose connections to the Hellfire Club would prove to be his undoing, and nearly the undoing of British democracy. Wilkes had been a frequent visitor to Medmenham Abbey, though he would later claim his attendance was purely satirical. He possessed a razor-sharp wit and an insatiable appetite for controversy, qualities that made him both a valuable ally and a dangerous enemy. His political writings had already earned him the ire of King George III. But it was his association with the Hellfire Club that would provide his enemies with the ammunition they needed to destroy him. The scandal began with the publication of an essay on woman, a pornographic parody of Alexander Pope's An Essay on Man. The poem, attributed to Wilkes, contained explicit sexual content and blasphemous religious imagery that shocked even the libertine society of 18th century London. But the truly explosive element was its dedication to Fanny Murray, a courtesan who had been a regular participant in the abbey's rituals. The poem detailed specific acts that had allegedly taken place during Hellfire ceremonies, complete with names, dates, and graphic descriptions. What made this scandal particularly devastating was the web of political connections it exposed. The Earl of Sandwich, a founding member of the Hellfire Club and a prominent government minister, found himself implicated in the affair. Letters seized from Wilkes' home revealed correspondence between club members discussing not just their sexual exploits, but matters of state. The line between pleasure and politics had become dangerously blurred. The government's response was swift and merciless. Wilkes was arrested on charges of seditious libel and expelled from Parliament, but the damage had already been done. The public had glimpsed behind the curtain of elite society and discovered a world of corruption, debauchery, and potential treason. Pamphlets circulated throughout London describing the monks of Medmenham as a cabal of politicians who sold their votes for sexual favors and made policy decisions while intoxicated with wine and lust. Perhaps most damaging were the allegations of foreign influence. Documents that briefly surfaced before mysteriously disappearing suggested that French agents had infiltrated the club's gatherings, using the members' indiscretions as leverage for espionage. The possibility that state secrets had been compromised in the midst of orgies and mock masses sent shockwaves through Whitehall. The club's network of informants and allies worked frantically to contain the damage. Witnesses were bought off or intimidated into silence. Documents vanished from government archives, often leaving behind only empty files with cryptic notations. The official investigation, led by men who had themselves attended abbey gatherings, concluded that the allegations were largely unfounded, a verdict that satisfied no one and convinced few. Yet the scandal's most insidious aspect was how it was used to reshape the narrative of the Hellfire Club itself. What had been portrayed as harmless libertine entertainment was suddenly recast as a genuine threat to national security. Former members scrambled to distance themselves from the organization, claiming they had attended only as observers or that their participation had been greatly exaggerated. The destruction of evidence was systematic and thorough. Sir Francis Dashwood, the club's founder, reportedly spent weeks burning documents at his estate. Servants at Medmenham Abbey were dismissed and scattered, often with generous severance payments that ensured their silence. The abbey itself was stripped of its most incriminating decorations and artifacts, though rumors persisted that the most damaging evidence had been hidden rather than destroyed. The scandal also revealed the extent to which the Hellfire Club had become entangled with Britain's financial system. Several members were prominent bankers and merchants who had used their club connections to secure lucrative government contracts. The East India Company, already facing criticism for its practices in India, found itself linked to the scandal through board members who had participated in abbey rituals. Stock prices fluctuated wildly as investors tried to gauge which institutions might be compromised. Foreign observers watched with fascination as Britain's elite tore itself apart. French diplomats sent detailed reports to Versailles describing the chaos in London, while American colonists saw the scandal as proof of British moral decay. The timing could not have been worse for a government already struggling to maintain control over its expanding empire. The aftermath of the scandal transformed British politics in ways that are still felt today. The concept of political privacy was fundamentally altered as the public demanded greater transparency from their leaders. The press, emboldened by the public's appetite for scandal, became more aggressive in its coverage of political figures. The modern tradition of investigative journalism can trace its roots to the reporters who first exposed the Hellfire Club's activities. But perhaps the most lasting impact was the establishment of what we now recognize as the political cover-up. The techniques used to suppress the Hellfire scandal, the destruction of evidence, the discrediting of witnesses, the manipulation of official investigations would become the template for future political crises. The club's members, in their desperate attempts to save themselves, had inadvertently created a blueprint for institutional corruption that would be refined and perfected over the centuries. Part 7. The Irish Hellfire Legacy. While the English Hellfire Club crumbled under the weight of scandal, its influence had already spread across the Irish Sea, taking root in the Emerald Hills surrounding Dublin. The Irish iteration of the Hellfire Club would prove to be far more extreme than its English predecessor, embracing not just libertinism, but genuine occultism, devil worship, and acts of violence that terrorized the Irish countryside for decades. The Irish Hellfire Club was founded in 1735 by Richard Parsons, 1st Earl of Ross, a man whose appetite for depravity was matched only by his fascination with the occult. Unlike the English club's satirical approach to blasphemy, the Irish version embraced genuine devil worship from its inception. Parsons had studied continental demonology during his grand tour of Europe, collecting grimoires and ritual implements that would later be used in the club's ceremonies. The club's headquarters was established at Montpelier Hill, a wind-swept summit 8 miles south of Dublin. The building itself was constructed as a hunting lodge, but its design incorporated elements that revealed its true purpose. The structure was built in the shape of a pentagram, with each wing corresponding to one of the 5 points of the Satanic Star. The main hall featured a massive fireplace designed to accommodate ritual fires, while the basement contained a series of chambers carved directly into the bedrock. The Irish Club's membership included some of the most powerful figures in Anglo-Irish society. Colonel Richard St. George, known as Hellfire Dick, was notorious for his cruelty to tenants and his participation in black masses. The 3rd Earl of Santry, Thomas Barry, was said to have murdered several servants during drunken rages and faced no consequences due to his aristocratic privilege. Henry Barry, 4th Earl of Barrymore, was rumored to have made a pact with the devil himself, trading his soul for worldly power and pleasure. The rituals conducted at Montpelier Hill were far more extreme than anything practiced at Medmenham Abbey. Eyewitness accounts, preserved in the correspondence of Protestant ministers and magistrates, describe ceremonies that began with the desecration of Christian symbols and escalated to animal sacrifice and worse. The club members, dressed in black robes and masks, would invoke demonic entities using ancient incantations translated from Latin and Greek grimoires. Local folklore preserves disturbing details of these gatherings. Servants from nearby estates reported seeing strange lights emanating from the lodge at all hours of the night. accompanied by screams and chanting that could be heard across the valley. Livestock in the area began dying mysteriously, their carcasses found drained of blood and arranged in occult patterns. Children from the surrounding villages would disappear, sometimes for days, only to return with no memory of their absence and strange marks on their bodies. The club's influence extended far beyond its mountaintop headquarters. Members used their political and economic power to shield their activities from investigation, bribing magistrates and intimidating witnesses. The Irish Protestant establishment, already viewing the Catholic majority with suspicion, saw the Hellfire Club as a useful tool for maintaining social control through fear and intimidation. Perhaps the most notorious incident occurred in 1740, when the club allegedly conducted a ritual that resulted in the building being struck by lightning and catching fire. According to contemporary accounts, the members had been attempting to summon the devil himself when the structure was consumed by flames. Several members perished in the blaze, their bodies found in poses that suggested they had been engaged in unspeakable acts when death claimed them. The fire was seen by locals as divine retribution, but the club's survivors interpreted it differently. They claimed that the conflagration had been a sign of their success, that their master had finally answered their summons. The ruins of the lodge were left standing as a monument to their devotion, and the club continued to meet among the charred stones, viewing the destruction as a form of consecration. The Irish Hellfire Club's practices grew increasingly extreme throughout the 1740s and 1750s. Reports emerged of ritual murders, with victims chosen from among the local Catholic population. Bodies were found mutilated in ways that corresponded to descriptions in medieval grimoires, their blood used to inscribe demonic symbols on the lodge's walls. The club members, emboldened by their apparent immunity from prosecution, began to see themselves as being above both human law and divine judgment. The club's activities eventually attracted the attention of more orthodox Protestant authorities, who recognized the threat it posed to social stability. A series of investigations were launched, but they invariably ended in failure as witnesses disappeared or recanted their testimony. The power and influence of the club's members made them effectively untouchable, and their reign of terror continued unabated. The decline of the Irish Hellfire Club began in the 1760s, as many of its founding members died under mysterious circumstances. Some locals claimed they had been claimed by the devil they had served so faithfully, while others suspected that the club's internal power struggles had turned deadly. The surviving members, lacking the charisma and ruthlessness of their predecessors, found it increasingly difficult to maintain their grip on power. The final blow came in 1771, when a group of Protestant reformers, backed by the British government, launched a systematic campaign to destroy the club's influence. Key members were arrested on charges ranging from murder to treason. Though many of the prosecutions failed due to lack of evidence or witness intimidation, the lodge at Montpelier Hill was officially abandoned, though locals reported that strange lights and sounds continued to emanate from the ruins for decades afterward. Today, the remains of the hunting lodge still stand on Montpelier Hill, a testament to one of the darkest chapters in Irish history. The local population continues to avoid the area, especially after dark, and numerous ghost stories and legends have grown up around the site. Paranormal investigators have reported equipment malfunctions, unexplained temperature drops, and the sound of voices speaking in languages that predate Christianity. The legacy of the Irish Hellfire Club extends far beyond its immediate historical impact. Its embrace of genuine occultism, as opposed to the satirical blasphemy of its English counterpart, helped to establish Ireland as a center of esoteric study and practice. The club's methods and rituals influenced later occult movements, including the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and various modern witchcraft traditions. Part 8. The Women of the Hellfire Clubs. Behind the masculine facade of the Hellfire Clubs lay a shadowy network of women whose roles were far more complex and influential than historical accounts typically acknowledge. These women courtesans, aristocrats, occultists, and outcasts were not merely passive participants in male debauchery, but active agents who shaped the club's rituals, politics, and ultimate fate. Their stories, deliberately obscured by both contemporary observers and later historians, reveal a darker and more nuanced picture of power, sexuality, and the occult in 18th century society. The most prominent of these female figures was Teresa Cornlys, a Venetian opera singer and courtesan who became the unofficial hostess of many Hellfire gatherings. Cornlys was no ordinary entertainer. She was a skilled practitioner of continental occultism who had studied under Italian witches and French ceremonial magicians. Her elaborate masquerade balls at Carlisle House served as recruiting grounds for the clubs, where potential members were evaluated and initiated into the mysteries through carefully orchestrated seductions and ritual encounters. Cornlys brought with her a sophisticated understanding of goddess worship and feminine mystery traditions that transformed the club's practices. Under her influence, the mock masses evolved to incorporate invocations to Venus, Diana, and other pagan deities, blending Christian blasphemy with ancient fertility rites. She introduced the practice of ritual sexuality as a form of magical working, teaching club members that their orgies were not mere hedonistic indulgences, but sacred acts that could channel divine power. The Duchess of Kingston, Elizabeth Chudleigh, represented another archetype of female involvement in the clubs. A member of the royal court with connections throughout European high society, she used her position to provide political intelligence and protection for club activities. Her salon became a meeting place where club business was conducted under the cover of fashionable entertainment, and her network of female agents extended the club's influence into the highest levels of government. Chudleigh's interest in the occult was deeply personal. She had consulted fortune tellers and alchemists throughout her life, seeking to preserve her beauty and secure her position at court. Her participation in Hellfire rituals was motivated by a belief that she could harness supernatural forces to achieve her ambitions. Contemporary accounts describe her leading naked rituals in moonlit groves, invoking ancient goddesses while surrounded by flames and incense. The clubs also attracted women from the margins of society, including accused witches, fortune tellers, and practitioners of folk magic. These women brought with them traditional knowledge of herbalism, divination, and ritual practice that added authenticity to the club's occult activities. Mother Damnable, a notorious London witch, was said to have provided potions and charms for club members, while also serving as a conduit to the criminal underworld. Perhaps most disturbing were the accounts of younger women who disappeared in connection with club activities. Missing persons reports from the period show a pattern of young women, often from poor or marginalized backgrounds, who vanished after being recruited for club gatherings. Some were found days or weeks later, often with no memory of their experiences and bearing mysterious marks or brands. Others were never seen again, their fates becoming the subject of whispered rumors and folk legends. The female-led rites within the clubs were particularly secretive and extreme. These ceremonies, conducted when male members were absent, allegedly involved blood rituals, animal sacrifice, and invocations to dark goddesses. Lady Betty Germain, a prominent member of London society, was reported to have presided over rituals in which women would cut themselves and use their blood to inscribe demonic symbols on their bodies. These gatherings were said to be far more violent and sexually explicit than the mixed-gender ceremonies. The women of the clubs wielded considerable power through their control of information and access. They served as intelligence networks, gathering secrets from lovers, husbands, and political allies that could be used for blackmail or political manipulation. Several major political scandals of the era can be traced to information obtained through these feminine networks, as pillow talk became a form of espionage. The club's female members also played crucial roles in recruitment and initiation. They identified potential new members through their social connections and orchestrated elaborate seduction scenarios designed to compromise prominent men. Once these targets were sufficiently compromised, they could be inducted into the club's inner circles, where their participation in increasingly extreme activities ensured their silence and loyalty. The relationship between the clubs and prostitution was complex and multifaceted. While some women were clearly exploited, others used their involvement as a means of social advancement. High-end courtesans like Kitty Fisher and Fanny Murray parlayed their connections to club members into considerable wealth and influence. They operated their own salons and brothels, often serving as unofficial recruitment centers for the clubs, while building their own networks of power and patronage. The Irish Hellfire Club's treatment of women was particularly brutal. Female servants and peasants from the surrounding countryside were often kidnapped and forced to participate in rituals that combined sexual assault with occult practice. The club's members viewed these women as expendable resources, and many were killed during or after their participation in ceremonies. The absence of legal protections for poor Irish women made these crimes virtually impossible to prosecute. Some women managed to turn their knowledge of club secrets into sources of power and protection. Margaret Caroline Rudd, a courtesan with connections to multiple club members, used her inside knowledge to manipulate political figures and avoid prosecution for various crimes. Her ability to expose the sexual and occult activities of powerful men made her effectively untouchable, and she leveraged this protection to build a criminal empire that spanned decades. The club's influence on women's occult practices extended far beyond their formal membership. The rituals and beliefs promoted by figures like Teresa Cornley's helped to revive interest in goddess worship and feminine spirituality among educated women of the era. This influence can be traced through the development of various esoteric traditions that emerged in the 19th and 20th centuries, many of which claimed direct descent from Hellfire Club practices. The documentation of women's roles in the clubs is deliberately incomplete, as both contemporary observers and later historians were reluctant to acknowledge the full extent of female agency in these organizations. Many records were destroyed or edited to minimize women's contributions, presenting them as victims rather than active participants. This systematic erasure has made it difficult to reconstruct the full scope of women's involvement and influence. Modern feminist scholarship has begun to reassess the roles of women in the Hellfire clubs, recognizing them as complex figures who navigated limited options in a patriarchal society. While some were undoubtedly exploited and victimized, others used their participation to gain power, wealth, and influence that would have been impossible to achieve through conventional means. Their stories challenge traditional narratives about women's agency and sexuality in the 18th century. The legacy of the club's female members can be seen in the continued association between feminine sexuality and occult power in popular culture. The archetypal figure of the seductive witch or goddess-worshipping courtesan, while often stereotypical and problematic, preserves some memory of these women's roles as practitioners of alternative spirituality and wielders of unconventional power. Part 9 echoes into the 20th century. The dissolution of the original Hellfire clubs in the late 18th century marked not an end, but a transformation. The ideas, practices, and networks they had established continued to evolve and resurface throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, adapting to new social contexts while maintaining their core appeal to those who sought power through transgression and secret knowledge. The club's influence can be traced through a shadowy lineage of occult societies, political conspiracies, and cultural movements that continue to shape our world today. The Victorian era saw the emergence of numerous secret societies that claimed direct descent from the original Hellfire clubs. The most significant of these was the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, founded in 1888 by William Wynne Westcott, Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathers, and William Robert Woodman. While the Golden Dawn presented itself as a respectable organization dedicated to the study of ceremonial magic and esoteric philosophy, its inner teachings and advanced rituals bore striking resemblances to the practices developed at Medmen Abbey. The Golden Dawn's initiation ceremonies incorporated elements of mock death and rebirth that echoed the Hellfire Club's blasphemous masses, while its emphasis on the union of opposites and the transcendence of conventional morality clearly derived from the earlier organization's philosophical foundations. Several prominent members, including Aleister Crowley and Arthur Edward Waite, would later acknowledge their debt to the Hellfire tradition in their own writings and teachings. Crowley himself became perhaps the most direct inheritor of the Hellfire legacy. His philosophy of Thelema, centered on the maxim, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," was a direct quotation from the motto inscribed above the entrance to Medmenham Abbey. Crowley's own secret societies, including the Ordo Templi Orientis and the Argenteum Ashram, combined the Hellfire Club's emphasis on sexual ritual with modern psychological and magical theory, creating a synthesis that would influence occult practice throughout the 20th century. The political dimensions of the Hellfire legacy also persisted into the modern era. The Bohemian Club, founded in San Francisco in 1872, brought together powerful businessmen, politicians, and cultural figures in an atmosphere of ritualized male bonding and theatrical performance. The club's annual gathering at Bohemian Grove, featuring the mock sacrifice of dull care to a giant owl statue, clearly echoed the dramatic rituals that had characterized the original club's ceremonies. Members of the Bohemian Club have included numerous U.S. presidents, Supreme Court justices, and captains of industry, leading to persistent speculation about the group's influence on American politics and policy. The club's blend of homosocial bonding, theatrical ritual, and political networking directly paralleled the functions that the Hellfire clubs had served in 18th century British society, suggesting that the underlying social dynamics that had given rise to the original organizations remained relevant in the modern world. The rise of fascism in the 20th century saw several attempts to revive Hellfire club practices in service of totalitarian politics. The Thule Society, which played a crucial role in the early development of the Nazi Party, combined occult practices with radical political ideology in ways that clearly drew on the Hellfire tradition. The Society's members, including Rudolf Hess and other prominent Nazis, participated in rituals that blended ancient Germanic paganism with modern racial theory, creating a toxic synthesis that would contribute to some of the 20th century's greatest horrors. Less politically charged but equally significant was the revival of interest in the Hellfire clubs among British and American elites during the Jazz Age. The sexual liberation and social rebellion of the 1920s created an atmosphere conducive to the club's resurrection, and several organizations explicitly modeled themselves on the original clubs. The Hellfire Club of London, founded in 1924, brought together artists, writers, and socialites in recreations of 18th century rituals, complete with period costumes and elaborate ceremonies. These modern revivals often lacked the genuine transgressive power of their predecessors, serving more as elaborate costume parties than genuine challenges to social order. However, they did preserve and transmit the club's ritual practices and philosophical ideas to new generations of practitioners, ensuring that the tradition would continue to evolve and adapt to changing circumstances. The 1960s counterculture movement saw another significant revival of interest in the Hellfire legacy. The era's emphasis on sexual liberation, drug experimentation, and rejection of conventional morality created an environment where the club's practices could be reinterpreted for a new generation. Anton LaVey's Church of Satan, founded in 1966, explicitly drew on the Hellfire tradition, combining theatrical Satanism with libertine philosophy in ways that clearly echoed the original club's approach to blasphemy and transgression. The influence of the Hellfire clubs on popular culture became increasingly prominent during the latter half of the 20th century. Films, novels, and television shows regularly featured secret societies modeled on the clubs, while the iconography of masked figures conducting elaborate rituals became a standard element of horror and thriller genres. This cultural proliferation helped to ensure that the club's imagery and ideas remained present in the collective consciousness, even as their historical origins were often forgotten or distorted. The modern period has also seen serious academic study of the Hellfire clubs, with historians working to separate fact from fiction in the club's legacy. This scholarship has revealed the extent to which the club's practices and ideas influenced the development of modern occultism, libertarian philosophy, and alternative spirituality. The club's emphasis on individual freedom, sexual liberation, and the rejection of conventional morality can be seen as anticipating many of the social movements that would emerge in the 20th century. The internet age has facilitated new forms of Hellfire club revival, with online communities and virtual gatherings allowing practitioners to explore the club's teachings and practices without the geographical and social constraints that had limited earlier revivals. These digital descendants of the original clubs continue to evolve and adapt, incorporating new technologies and social media platforms while maintaining their core commitment to transgression and secret knowledge. The transformation of the Hellfire Caves at West Wickham into a tourist attraction represents perhaps the most visible legacy of the clubs in the modern era. The caves, which once hosted the most secret and transgressive rituals of the 18th century, now welcome thousands of visitors each year, their occult significance sanitized and commercialized for mass consumption. Yet even this transformation serves to preserve some memory of the club's historical importance, ensuring that their legacy continues to influence contemporary culture. The continued resonance of the Hellfire Club legacy in the 21st century suggests that the social and psychological needs that gave rise to the original organizations remain relevant today. The desire for transgression, secret knowledge, and alternative forms of power continues to drive individuals and groups to seek out modern versions of the club's practices and philosophies, ensuring that their influence will persist into the future. Part 10. What they left behind. As we reach the end of our journey through the shadowy history of the Hellfire Clubs, we must grapple with the fundamental questions that their legacy poses. What were they really? Were they simply libertine societies providing aristocratic entertainment, genuine occult organizations seeking supernatural power, or something far more complex and dangerous? The answer, like the clubs themselves, resists simple categorization and continues to influence our world in ways both subtle and profound. The physical remnants of the clubs provide tantalizing clues to their true nature. The ruins of Montpelier Hill in Ireland stand as a testament to the club's embrace of genuine occultism. Their blackened stones bearing traces of ritual fires and carved symbols that predate Christianity. The Hellfire Caves beneath West Wickham, despite their transformation into a tourist attraction, still contain chambers that were never opened to the public, sealed passages that local authorities refuse to discuss, and architectural features that suggest purposes far more sinister than simple entertainment. Archaeological investigations of these sites, conducted sporadically over the past century, have yielded disturbing evidence of the club's activities. Excavations at Medmenham Abbey uncovered human bones arranged in ritual patterns, along with artifacts that clearly indicate the practice of ceremonial magic. Chemical analysis of soil samples from the caves has revealed traces of substances used in occult rituals, including mercury, sulfur, and organic compounds that suggest the burning of human remains. The philosophical legacy of the clubs is perhaps more significant than their physical remains. The motto, "Do what thou wilt," first inscribed above the entrance to Medmenham Abbey, has become one of the most influential maxims in modern occultism and libertarian philosophy. Aleister Crowley's adoption of this phrase as the central tenet of his thelemic philosophy ensured its transmission to subsequent generations of occultists and freethinkers, while its appearance in popular culture has made it a symbol of rebellion and individual freedom. This philosophical inheritance extends far beyond the realm of occultism. The club's emphasis on the rejection of conventional morality, the pursuit of individual pleasure, and the use of secret knowledge as a source of power can be seen as anticipating many of the social and intellectual movements that would emerge in the 19th and 20th centuries. The libertarian philosophy that emerged from the Enlightenment, the sexual revolution of the 1960s, and the contemporary emphasis on personal freedom and self-expression all bear traces of the club's influence. The club's impact on the development of modern conspiracy theory cannot be overstated. Their combination of political power, secret ritual, and occult practice created a template for understanding how elite groups might operate behind the scenes of conventional society. The persistent beliefs in shadowy cabals of powerful individuals conducting bizarre rituals while manipulating world events clearly derive from the historical reality of the Hellfire Club's activities. This conspiratorial legacy has had both positive and negative consequences. On one hand, it has encouraged healthy skepticism about the actions of political and economic elites, promoting the idea that power structures should be transparent and accountable to the public. On the other hand, it has contributed to the proliferation of unfounded conspiracy theories that distort public understanding of complex social and political phenomena. The club's influence on the development of modern psychology and the understanding of human sexuality has been profound, but often unacknowledged. Their exploration of the relationship between power, sexuality, and ritual anticipated many of the insights that would later be developed by psychologists and anthropologists. The club's recognition that sexual behavior could be used as a form of social control, political manipulation, and spiritual practice prefigured the work of figures like Sigmund Freud, Wilhelm Reich, and Michel Foucault. The modern occult revival that began in the 19th century and continues today owes a significant debt to the club's synthesis of ancient magical practices with Enlightenment rationalism. The club's members were among the first to approach occultism from a scholarly perspective, collecting and studying grimoires, ritual texts, and magical artifacts from various traditions. Their systematic approach to magical practice helped to establish the foundations of modern ceremonial magic and neo-pagan spirituality. The club's legacy is also evident in the persistent fascination with secret societies in popular culture. Films, television shows, novels, and video games regularly feature organizations modeled on the Hellfire Clubs, complete with masked figures, elaborate rituals, and hidden agendas. This cultural proliferation has helped to ensure that the club's imagery and ideas remain present in the collective consciousness, even as their historical origins are often forgotten or distorted. The question of what remains hidden beneath West Wickham continues to intrigue researchers and occultists alike. The cave's modern guardians maintain that all areas are open to public inspection, but local residents and former employees tell different stories. Reports persist of sealed chambers, hidden passages, and areas that remain off-limits to visitors. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in the 1990s revealed anomalous structures beneath the caves, including what appear to be circular chambers and tunnel networks that do not match the known layout of the tourist attraction. These underground mysteries are compounded by the continued reports of paranormal activity in the area. Visitors to the caves frequently report equipment malfunctions, unexplained temperature changes, and the sensation of being watched by unseen presences. Local residents speak of strange lights emanating from the hills at night, accompanied by sounds that seem to echo from deep beneath the earth. These phenomena, while dismissed by skeptics as natural occurrences or psychological suggestion, continue to fuel speculation about what the clubs might have left behind. The political implications of the club's legacy remain relevant today. Their demonstration that secret societies could operate within democratic institutions while pursuing agendas that contradicted public interest has provided a blueprint for understanding how power might be exercised in modern societies. The club's use of blackmail, bribery, and sexual compromise as tools of political control established patterns of behavior that continue to influence contemporary politics. The club's approach to the intersection of religion and politics also remains significant. Their systematic blasphemy and rejection of Christian authority helped to establish the precedent for secular governance and the separation of church and state. At the same time, their embrace of alternative spiritualities and occult practices demonstrated how religious belief could be used as a form of social resistance and political rebellion. The gender dynamics explored by the clubs continue to influence contemporary discussions about power, sexuality, and social control. Their recognition that sexual behavior could be used as both a form of liberation and a tool of oppression anticipated many of the insights that would later be developed by feminist theorists and gender studies scholars. The club's treatment of women as both victims and agents reveals the complex ways in which gender, power, and sexuality intersect in human societies. The club's legacy also raises important questions about the nature of historical memory and the ways in which inconvenient truths are suppressed or distorted. The systematic destruction of evidence, the intimidation of witnesses, and the manipulation of official records that followed the club's exposure established patterns of institutional cover-up that continue to influence how powerful organizations respond to scandal and criticism. As we conclude our exploration of the Hellfire clubs, we are left with more questions than answers. Were they rebels who challenged the hypocrisies of their time? Degenerates who indulged in vice and cruelty? Or occultists who genuinely sought to harness supernatural forces? The truth, as always, is likely more complex than any single interpretation can capture. What is certain is that their influence continues to shape our world in ways both visible and hidden, a testament to the enduring power of secret knowledge and forbidden practices. The club's motto, "Do what thou wilt," remains as provocative and controversial today as it was in the 18th century. In an age of increasing surveillance and social control, their emphasis on individual freedom and the rejection of conventional morality continues to resonate with those who seek alternatives to mainstream society. Whether this legacy represents liberation or corruption depends, perhaps, on one's perspective and intentions. What lies buried beneath West Wickham may never be fully known, but the ideas and practices that emerged from those hidden chambers continue to influence human consciousness and behavior. The Hellfire clubs, in all their contradictions and complexities, remain a powerful reminder that the pursuit of forbidden knowledge and the rejection of social constraints can have consequences that extend far beyond the intentions of their original practitioners. Thanks for watching No Sleep Historian. Like and subscribe for more buried truths, lost chapters, and forbidden stories. Until next time, sleep tight if you can.